Vanguard!
After the big Grey War against Geese, Altmile went back to his hometown for a well-deserved rest. But this time, he came back richer than he left, as he has now a family to return to. Years later, with a new threat looming on the horizon, Altmile, the Knight of the Sky, has no choice to return to the battlefield. But in these years, he hasn't been enjoying a peaceful life. After years of training and learning some tricks from Night Rose, he grasped one of his destinies and became the Aerial Divine Knight. Aerial Divine Knight Altmile is the ultimate form of the Blue Sky Knight. He learned to harness his true potential and truly became a leader befitting of the title. Altmile isn't a warrior that stands alone, he is a warrior that is stronger with his comrades, and that is best seen through his two powerful skills. His first skill allows him to passively give all grade 2s an increase of 10k power and an increase of 5k shield, if you manage to put all your damage face down. And on top of that, if you have an Altmile in the soul, all those units gain an additional critical. His second ability flows into his passive ability, as once per turn he can superior call a grade 2 from the deck and drop zone for the cost of a counterblast and soul blast. This allows Altmile to flood the board and get more value out of his continuous passive ability. These two skills combined allows Altmile to put out high pressure, but at the same time have an increased defensive stance, as you can keep recalling grade 2s from the drop zone to keep getting value out of your increased shield value. It's very clear that Altmile is as strong as his comrades, so let's take a look at the support card for Altmile to get a better understanding of what this deck can do. First off, we have original form of Altmile Blue Sky Knight Altmile. This grid 3 allows us to have a solid beater on the field, as it can become a 28k unit without any power increase, which is a solid number, especially in the early game. But on top of that, he allows you to get +1 by selectively searching grade 2 cards, so you can fetch out the new grade 2 order, Power Rise Elixir, or the next card. Absolute Blade Knight Liverot is arguably the best grade 2 in the new Altmile deck. It is a direct upgrade of Conjurer of Mithril, as you can search out any grade 2 unit to help flood the board. But on top of that, its cost is flexible, meaning if you run out of counterblast, you can switch over to Soul, which is an insane effect. Then next up, we have another grade 2, which is fighting for the number 1 spot with Liverot, as we have Counter Offensive Knight Suleiman. This grade 2 is a massive consistency boost card, as well as an amazing early tempo card. This card allows us to get a grade 3 Altmile to the field on turn 2, meaning if we hit Blue Sky Altmile, we can swing in with a massive 28k beater on turn 2. But not only that, it allows us to bounce back the Altmile to our hand, so we have it as a potential right target for next turn. Even in the case we don't hit an Altmile, we can still call down a grade 2 to always have 2 attacks in and bounce the card so our opponent can't retire or damage denials next turn, which allows us to play a very high tempo game. Then next up, we have the grade 2 that rounds up the entire deck, as we have Starlight Violinist. Aerial Divine Knight Altmile allows us to empower grade 2s, but with only 2 spots on the field to effectively call grade 2s to, his skill is pretty limited. Thanks to Starlight Violinist, we can call grade 2s to all 5 circles and have full use out of Aerial Divine Knight skill, as we have 5 units that have an increase of 10k power that can boost and have 5k extra shield value while being able to intercept from the back row. This allows us to play a very high tempo and high value game. Now that we have the grade 2s fleshed out, we can look at the select grade 1s that help this strategy. First off, we have the grade 3 searcher Laurel Knight Cecilius. This helps us to search for our limited grade 3s, as well as being aggressive in the early game, as it's a nice 13k booster or beater in the first 2 turns. And you can also use his discard to set up the drop zone with good grade 2 targets. Then the second grade 1, which combos with Cecilius and many other cards, is Lunar Crescent Knight Velox. This card has the exact same bounce scale as Suleiman, which allows it to be a very solid early tempo card. You can combine it with Cecilius to have 2 solid 13k attacks, but also being able to reuse the same Cecilius for next turn. In the subsequent turns, you can combine it with Suleiman to bounce back half a field while generating a solid 28k Vanguard swing, or just to abuse different on-place effects. The resource game for this Altmile deck is very interesting, as most builds have a whole bunch of counterblast skills, but that is so you're able to fulfill the condition of getting all your damage face down, which makes for an interesting dynamic. But on top of that, you have plenty of soul blasting skills which are pretty powerful, so you need to keep track of your resources so you don't overextend, and also mitigate the amount of damage you take a turn so you can use all your damage the following turn without needing to make awkward plays. As for the trigger lineup, and this is where things becomes very interesting, as soon as we now have the brand new crit sentinels, we can basically go any route. You can go high tempo and go for 12, maybe even 16 crits, as we have multiple ways to plus out of the deck with our searchers, but running some draws, or mainly draw PGs, allows us to have a bit higher defense against super strong attacks that would take too much to guard with conventional guarding. So adjust your trigger lineup to your own playstyle and environment. Now we get to the force markers. This deck can go either way. The deck inherently can build solid high numbers, which can easily reach 30 to 40k, and we can also give those columns a natural crit, and we probably will run a surplus of crit triggers. So the question lies, do you rather want to increase those attacks with an additional crit, or allow your Vanguard to always swing with 2 crits? Or do you want to increase those columns with another 10k? Both these answers are correct. Force 1 and Force 2 work with this deck, but it depends entirely how your deck is built, against what deck you're playing, and what the current situation is. Now that we addressed the basics, let's take a look how things will look if we put everything in practice. We're going to look at a special grade 2 toolbox deck that abused the fact that we can search out for our grade 2s from the deck as well as the drop zone. We also focus on a deck that has a special soul engine for its core game plan, but before all that, we first are going to take a look at a deck that we can build straight from the next stage extra booster set, plus the Altmile trial deck. In this list, we can see the basics from the 2 Altmile grade 3s and the key grade 2s as well as grade 1s. But we see 3 new additions which we haven't talked about. First, we have another grade 2 Hopesong Angel. This unit allows us to specifically search our deck and call a Starlight Violinist. This in itself sounds like a terrible card, as it's a much more restrictive skill than something like Liverot. And the answer is yes. However, this card allows us to extend our plays if we need to use more counterblast or if we need to swarm the field, because Aerial Divine and Altmile wants to have a board filled with grade 2s and all damage face down. Hopesong Angel allows us to call 1 more grade 2 and use 1 more counterblast, as we can go from a Liverot into a Hopesong into a Starlight, which allows us to throw down 2 face down damage and call 3 grade 2s by only calling 1 card from our hand. And then we can fill the remaining 2 spots with the superior call effect of Aerial Divine Knight Altmile. The other new unit in this list is the grade 1 Knight of Secret Plan What. This 7k unit allows us to be more aggressive in the early game while retaining shield value, as it can intercept from the back row. This with our other grade 1 makes 15k numbers or potentially 20k numbers, and with Blue Sky Knight Altmile makes a solid 35k column, which hits good numbers against any grade 2. This is important as you can only call it in the early game, so you can intercept it away before you're going to rely on your grade 2 boards. But even in the late game, it makes magic numbers against Protect and Exile grade 3s with any grade 2s, so it has some late game applications. The final new card is the brand new card type, namely a Order card, as we run Power Rise Elixir. This grade 2 Order card allows us to increase any unit's power with an additional 20k power for the cost of 2 counterblast. This is a nice deck card as it allows us to throw excess damage face down, but not only that, we can search this card out with Blue Sky Knight Altmile, as it doesn't specify units. So it's a searchable Order card that works with the engine of the deck, which is really nice. So the idea behind this deck is to write Lunar Crescent Knight Felix and counter-offensive Knight Suleiman, so you're able to be very aggressive while retaining shield value. Both these cards allows you to reuse Cecilia's on-play search skill to look for your grade 3s. As for your grade 3 turns, you either want to go into Aerial Divine Knight directly or go into a Sky Knight and then follow it up with an Aerial Divine Knight Altmile. As long as you can end up at an Aerial Divine Knight Altmile, you should be good, as he is the preferred Vanguard. As for the rest of the game plan, you mainly want to swarm the board with grade 2s and call a Starlight Violinist so you can get the most value out of your cards. And that basically sums up the basic playstyle of Altmile, as the deck itself is diverse in early game, as you have the bouncing effects and different lines of plays, but the moment you get to your grade 3 turns, things start to get very one-dimensional, as you just want to build a board filled with grade 2s, which in itself limits the amount of combos or plays you can do. However, you can still use Suleiman and Felix bounce skills if you can't build a full grade 2 board to call grade 1s and blue Skynet Altmile to the field to press your opponent while also removing cards from the field. Now that we have an understanding how a generic out-of-the-box Altmile operates, let's take a look at an Altmile build that uses older cards to create an interesting soul engine for the deck. This list is very similar to the previous list, with the core being identical, but we switched up a few cards with some older ones, and thanks to that, this list got an entire new playstyle with a lot of different options. First off, let's go over the new units in the grade 1 lineups, as we have Pongal. This grade 1 allows us potentially soul charge a card as well as gaining a bit of power. This is great for the early game, but it's mainly here to combo off of our new grade 2 High Dog Breeder Akane. This grade 2 allows us to superior call Pongal to the field, which would allow us to activate the Pongal Soul Charge effect. This is great as it allows us to view our Soul Blasting skills like bounce effects, but more importantly, it will have a small random chance of soul charging an Altmile, which means we can ride a full power Aerial Divine at Altmile on turn 3. Besides the Akane Pongal duo, we also have Knight of Determination Lamorak. This card is mainly in the list to blast through a counterblast on demand. Similar to Hopesong Angel, only this card will give us more overall value, as you can probably have a full board anyways. And finally, we run a single copy of Blaster Blade. He's basically here for some spot removal if our opponent has an annoying unit on the field that we want to get rid of. Once the new Blaster Dart comes out, you can run him instead of Blaster Blade if you want an option to potentially hitting back row units. As explained, this deck revolves more on the soul, and that's because of Pongal. The idea is to use Pongal to not only allow us to reuse Felix and Suleiman, but mainly to get an Altmile in the soul as soon as possible. We can have multiple tries thanks to our bounce effects. If we can build a column on turn 1 and a Pongal, we can potentially get 3 tries for a single Pongal. The only thing to keep in mind is that we can't call a Pongal behind the Felix or Suleiman, as they bounce a unit from a different column. So doing this on turn 1 is very unlikely. Ideally, you call an Akane on turn 2 to search a Pongal, then bounce it back with our Vanguard Suleiman. You can still get a try on turn 3 as you ride Aerial Divine at Altmile, as it doesn't matter when the card goes into the soul as long as it happens before you attack. Besides that, you can keep reusing Pongal with either a Felix or Suleiman to reuse their abilities to get extra power out of your skills, if you can flood the board with enough grade 2s. Also, by chaining an Akane into a Pongal, which then gets bounced by a Suleiman or Felix, results in you going +1 for free, which is equivalent to 10k shields, which is always nice. As for the rest of the deck, you play very similar like the other Altmile deck, only now you have more grade 2 targets, and thanks to Lamorak, you can create higher numbers, and Blaster Blades can give you some spot removal, which is always nice. Now, with the unique soul engine covered, let's take a look at an Altmile deck that takes the grade 2 toolbox option to the extremes. As you can see, this deck plays a lot, and I mean a lot of grade 2s, and also a lot of different ones at low quantities. The reason that we can play them at low quantities is thanks to the fact that we can search them not only from the deck, but also from the drop, meaning we can get to our pieces whenever we want. Even though we run so many grade 2s, the overall core is still the same. However, besides the core grade 3s and 1s, we don't run any other units of those grades and solely fill the deck with grade 2s. So let's see what these new additions actually can do. The first new grade 2 is Knight of Dignity Characters. This grade 2 allows us to have a solid 20k shield interceptor in combination with Aerial Divine at Altmile. Followed up, we have Sage of Eminent Virtue Tion. This unit can be a solid 19k attacker or booster, which makes it the strongest grade 2 that doesn't cost any resources to acquire the extra power. But on top of that, this card can give us a small field protection, as when we have 2 copies in the front row, then they can't attack into your rear guards to deny you any damage as long as you 1 open circle on the field. An effect you can intercept from the back row or just bounce units means you can set up this quite easily. Also keep in mind his restriction can be circumvented if you just come to the back row and utilize him as a booster, as him being able to boost doesn't stop him from attacking even though you haven't filled out your entire field. With Tion covered, we have only one new unit, and that is Loading Angel. This grade 2 allows us to not only generate more soul, but to also draw into multiple cards, which can help us big time. This in itself combos nicely with Tion to activate the self-protection, but on top of that fuels cards like Aerial Divine at Altmile, Liverod, Salevan and Felix, which increases your hand size, which is pretty solid. The idea behind this deck is to outvalue your opponent. You can do this via brute force with strong early game plays and then overwhelm them with high hitting numbers once you go into Aerial Divine at Altmile, but you can also play a more long-term value game thanks to cards like Loading Angel, Caractacus and Tion, which gives you more defensive options and sustainability. No matter the stance you take, use the grade 2 toolbox to your utmost advantage. You can filter quite a lot of cards in this deck, so you can increase the chance for triggers big time. Also use your drop zone call wisely. You can only call 1 card from the drop zone per turn, but you can easily call 2 to 3 from the deck. So know when to call one of the 2-offs from your deck, as the moment they're all gone makes it a lot harder to keep reusing all of them, especially as Starlight Violinist is your main target to keep on the board. Against a non-control deck, this is less of an issue, but definitely becomes a problem as soon as they get some control options. Aerial Divine at Altmile is an amazing new boss unit for Royal Paladin. It allows the clan to use their grade 2s to their max capacity and really build an interesting toolbox deck type that will only evolve the more interesting and more powerful grade 2s they release for the clan. The only downside the deck has is that it's very linear in the late game and heavily relies on a single card, namely Starlight Violinist. Altmile's ready to face any threat head on, equipped with years of experience and supported by the best platoon Royal Paladin could ever muster. He's more than ready to dive into action. But unbeknownst to him, he is being watched from afar. Who or what could this mysterious figure be lurking in the mist? And that concludes the deck spotlight for Aerial Divine at Altmile. If you're interested in more content like these deck spotlights, then subscribe to the channel, as the next coming days we will dive into the deck spotlights for the other 2 clans for the next stage. So you can expect a deck spotlights for Gear Chronicle as well as Neo Nectar. I want to give a big shout out to my Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/Vanguard Insider. You guys make everything on this channel possible. If you do want to support the channel or everything that we're doing on the channel, you can simply do that by subscribing and hitting the bell button to be updated for a future video, or you can go to patreon.com/Vanguard Insider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Timeleap, and I see you guys in the next one.